Shalom Yesharala. First and foremost, I want to give all praises and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rachah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessing to those La'akim that's preach the word in all truth and sincerity. Belong to Israelite foreigner brothers that were like the heathens. But the line of outside goes back to the nation of Israel. Which the nation of Israel are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans through the prophecies and curses of Deuteronomy 28 chapter and throughout the Bible. So this is your brother Yakal Amon, back to the video, and today's video will be entitled, Have Regard to Thy Name. I'm just going to go on some precepts and Lord willing, you brothers and your sisters out there be edified through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai. Have regard to thy name, because, being this truth, having a good name is very, very important. Which a good name is synonymous with having good reputation, amongst the body, amongst the Akim, in the faith, and the scriptures speak about that. And I just want to go into a lesson in regards to that. But before I begin the lesson, I'm going to start off reading Sirach 41 and 12 in the Apocrypha, and I'll get the definition for the word regard. It says, Have regard to thy name, for that shall continue with thee above 1,000 great treasures of gold. That's right, man. Because not only that, we're supposed to have a good name amongst Akim, but also amongst Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai, because we understand that, reincarnation is biblical, you come back every third or fourth generation, and once you come back in the reincarnation, you come back in your lot, so if you were a righteous man in your past life, you were serving Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai, you were a prophet. In your next life, you'll come back as the same, and with being a prophet, you have to have a good name as well, a true prophet, and that word regard, the word regard means to consider or think of in a specific way, to show respect or admiration, or to look at someone or something closely, So I want to emphasize on the word respect and admiration, because you having a good name, it will bring you that, it will bring you respect and admiration amongst the Akim, and when you go to verse 13 in Sirach 41, it says, A good life had but a few days, but a good name endure forever. And that's correct. So a good life, for example, these Edomites, they're in their kingdom right now. They're in their rest, begin on with the elites thereof. And they having a good life right now. They got all that their heart can wish, as the scriptures say. They have abundance of riches. They got gold, silver. They got a lot of resources. I'm talking about the elites of Esau. So they have a good life, but guess what? It's only but a few days. It's short-lived, man. And best believe in the kingdom, they're gonna be our slaves in service, man, to the Israelites. And they're gonna be brought very, very low to the dust, man. But it says, but a good name endure forever, right? So a good name endure forever. For example, when we read the accounts of our righteous forefathers, those accounts happened, thousands of years ago, dealing with our forefather Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Noah, all the sons of God, the righteous men, King David. The fact that we still read about them today, and we got the records on how they please Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai with their righteous acts, shows you that their name endure forever. Moses, Joshua, Caleb, it's a lot of prominent men in the scriptures that have a good name, and their good name, their good reputation is we read about them today, So that shows you, man, the righteous will never be the righteous will never be cut off, as the scriptures say. You see, and when you go to Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 7:1, it says, "A good name is better than precious ointment." Yeah, because we know precious ointment, it can heal you, like the oil salves, or it could just make you smell very good. That aroma. You can smell, a very, very high quality oil that's not diluted, that's not watery, that's very thick, and it has a very good aroma to it. A good name is way better than that, It says, in the day of death than the day of one's birth, right? Because, the day of death, because at least, we got to live our full life, until the Lord, called us up, we'll call you, pick your number, because at least you get to, you was able to live your life. You was able to, instead of the day of one's birth, because when you're born, you really, you don't know anything, so scripture saying is basically it's better to live your full life and ultimately dying than, the day of one's birth, because day of one's birth, your people got to cater to you. Your parents got to take care of you. You don't know right from wrong, as opposed to the, when you living all the way to the day of your death, But Proverbs 22:1. This lesson won't be long. It'll just be a quick hit, Proverbs 22:1. It says, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches," right? Because in this society, a good name is overlooked. Having a good reputation, being righteous, that's often overlooked over finances, over riches, man. People would rather, have $1 billion in their account than be righteous. People would rather be vile and disgusting and have to do disgusting acts to be rich, but yet they have an evil name amongst Yahweh Shimon Shai. But us in this truth, we're supposed to have a good name, is rather to be chosen in great riches, man. Having a good name amongst the Akim. Of course, people in the world too. But we understand people in the world gonna hate us for the most part. But having a good name amongst the Akim and Yahweh Shimon Shai, that's way greater than riches. It's just in loving favor rather than silver and gold. So being favorable, is pleasant. It's better than having silver and gold. Of course, every brother has his own spirit. Some brothers is more lively than others. Some brothers is more reserved and laid back. Some brothers is more outgoing. But nonetheless, what we all have to share in common is that we all got to have a good name. So, and we go to Proverbs 15:30. Same book, different chapter. Proverbs 15:30, it says, "The light of the eyes rejoiceth the heart, and a good report maketh the bones fat." And when you go into another translation of the scripture, when you go into the NLT version, "A cheerful look brings joy to the heart." Yeah. So, also, you want to have a cheerful look amongst the Akim, when Akim, behold you. You don't want to have a dark countenance like Jake in the world, 2/3. Because when you see Jakes in the world, man, most of them, you may have some Jakes that's in fitness, and, when you see them, they look well, they look very healthy. But for the most part, man, when you see Jake in the world, they have a dark countenance. They don't have like a joyful countenance, man. But us in this truth, we're supposed to have a joyful countenance when the Akim see us. I'm not saying you're just gonna be smiling and all the time and jolly, but Akim should still see, a light within you, the light of Yahweh Shema Shai within you, man. Not no, dark spirit. Akim not supposed to see you have a dark spirit like Jake in the world. Is what I'm trying to say. It says, "Good news makes for good health." Right. So, report or news, that's very, rather, that's very, very good. So you want to have a good report amongst the elders of it in your state, the GMS elders in whatever state you're in. You want to have a good report amongst them and the other Akim, amongst the camp. You see, because the scriptures, it spoke about certain men that have good reports. Let's see. I know it's in the New Testament. Just try to find one real quick. Cornelius, which he was a Israelite foreigner. Scriptures don't say how he looked, but it may have looked like a so-called white man, but he was in the Italian band. He was in the army, but he had traits and characteristics of an Israelite, which he was an Israelite. It says, let's go to Cornelius. Let's see, let's see. I know it said he had a good report. Just want to get straight to it. Okay. Yeah, this is Acts 10 and 22. And they said Cornelius the centurion, which the centurion officer in the Roman Empire was an officer over 100 men. It says a just man and one that feared Yahweh and of good report among all the nation of the Jews, was warned from Yahweh by the holy angel to send for thee in his house to hear words of thee. So Cornelius, he had a good report. He had a good reputation. Amongst the Jews, nation of the Jews, and amongst the Israelites, the southern kingdom at that time, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Acts 22 and 12, it says, and one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there. So Ananias, I believe believe that's the same Ananias that the Lord sent Paul. That's the same Ananias that the Lord sent Apostle Paul to heal his eyesight when he was blind. Yeah. Yep. And this is Apostle Paul. I believe this is him giving his testimony. Let's see. Yeah, he was giving his testimony on. I believe he was. Yeah. But brothers can read into it. But just get to the point. Acts 22 and 11 says, and when I could not see for the glory of thy light, because Apostle Paul, he was blinded, being led by before he was called Apostle Paul, he was called Saul. He was blinded at that time. Being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus, which is in Syria. And one Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there. So Ananias, he had a good reputation amongst the Akim. So that shows you right there that, the New Testament spoke about men, Israelite men that had good reports in the truth. So we have to have that same, we have to have a good report as well, Hebrews 11 and 12, for by the elders obtained a good report, and you read Hebrews 11. Basically, that's just like a shout out to all our righteous forefathers that pleased Yahweh by Shema Shai and had good works with the Lord and had faith and had good reports, So Uh, 3 John 1 and 12, it says, Demetrius have good report of all men, the truth itself. Yeah, and we also bear record, and you know that our record is true. Yeah, so Demetrius, he got a good report, Mr. Akim. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Just want to do a quick lesson on that, have regard to thy name, having a good report, because amongst the Akim, and Yahweh, first and foremost, Yahweh by Shemon Shai and the Akim, man. And Lord willing, we part of the elect. The Lord's gonna reward us for all our good deeds, So yeah, I just wanted to make a lesson on that. Lord willing, I could edified. And until next time, Shalom.